Hello, Heathens! I'm Megan Angus, and this is Spinning the Wheel podcast. In this weekly audio ritual, we explore the 8 seasons of the Witch's Wheel of the Year, and we discover how it is so much more than 8 Sabbats. We weirding witches time travel through holy days, festivals, and celestial events connecting our celebrations and magic to the past, present, and future. Our cackling fills the night as we take our turn gathering the wool, wielding the distaff, and spinning the wheel. Hello, Heathens! Welcome back to Spinning the Wheel podcast with me, your, flammable host, Megan Angus, churning and burning here on the wheel, right? 2023, here we go. Okay, so sorry for the hiccup in the last couple of weeks of scheduled programming. I had a weird thing going on with my recording setup. I believe I have solved the problems, hopefully just in time for Mercury retrograde. So we'll find out, right? We don't have a retrograde this week. It's next week with a lot of other quite spicy astrology, which I am going to talk about at the end of the podcast, just as a little pre-funk to get you ready for what is coming next week. But this week, we have a variety of things to talk about, so let's get into that. I'm gonna take my earrings off. I can hear them. I can hear them rattling. Oh, Okay. Before we get into the stuff, let's get into the stuff. Thanks for joining me here on Ye Old Podcast. Thanks to my patrons who make it possible that I even do this. So also blame them. Okay. Just some notes, some general housekeeping. I posted this on Patreon for my patrons as well. But welcome to tarot. My 6-week introduction to tarot will be going live at the beginning of May. If you would like to join us, we'd love to have you. It will be open to 12 people. 10% of the ticket price is going to go to a nonprofit like we always do. I'm not certain who yet. I'll figure that out. Probably another Roma rites group. Maybe we'll go with the same one we did last time. Not sure. Okay. But anyways, I try to keep these classes limited to 12 people at most. Because I just like it to be a little bit more intimate. That gives us some time and space to do the thing. Information will be available on my website soon. I know I realize I'm announcing this with like 2.5 weeks in advance, but man, when I got sick last month, that just like knocked me off my game. And then having my recording hiccup or my audio hiccup that I've had, I just feel like I was out in front of it and now I'm behind it. Whatever. It is what it is. But anyways, welcome to Tarot, 6-week workshop that is a thorough foundational introduction to the practice of tarot, going live very, very soon. Tickets are going to be available for patrons first, and then folks that are subscribed to my newsletter, and then the general populace if there are any seats left. Folks who are subscribed to my Patreon get discounts and early access. Folks that are subscribed to my newsletter also get a small discount code and earlier access. So conduct yourself accordingly. Okay. For patrons, our next tarot circle is going to be 420. Okay, that's enough of that. We are going to be doing a community reading for spring. Our next Wheel of the Year class is Beltane, and it is right around the corner, people. Didn't I say this? I'm pretty sure I said it. At the beginning of Ostara season, at the beginning of spring, the beginning of Aries, it moves fast. And it's like all of a sudden, here we are, and we're, it's winter. Nope. We're already in the heart of spring and we're racing towards summer. This time period moves very, very quickly. So our next Wheel of the Year class is going to be Beltane. This is going to be another live stream on my YouTube channel, free for all humans. thanks to the support of my patrons. 4/26, April 26th, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Links and all of that BS will be available through my YouTube channel and on my website, etc., etc. Um, if you are wanting more information than what you get from the live stream, you can, say it with me, subscribe to my Patreon at the Venus level and higher, which is $9 a month and higher. You will get access to the workbook for the Sabbath, which has a giant calendar in it with hundreds of holidays, the holidays that we talk about here in the podcast, with lots of other stuff, incense recipes and spell advice and journaling entries and astrology and astronomy and folklore and more and more and more and more. Some pieces from the workbooks also get posted to Patreon from time to time. But join us. It'll be fucking amazing, I'm sure. I will be teaching a workshop for Litha at the Pagan Music Festival Cascadian Midsummer. This is on private land. Head to cascadianmidsummer.org, I believe is the address for that website, cmfest.org, for more information about that festival, etc., etc. It has been sold out. They are releasing extra tickets. So there you go. First come, first serve. What else is happening? I think that's it. Oh, I think I said this last week, but I want to say it again this week or whatever. I have been posting my notes from these podcasts to my Patreon. That is for everybody that is subscribed at the Mercury level and higher. That's $5 a month and up. You will get the not the transcription of this, but my notes for this. So everything that I have written down to kind of get me started on my rants and tangents, as well as charts for the moons, charts for the major astrology of the week, not every transit, but one or two transits that I think are particularly influential, and links. Some are the links that I actually use, and some are links that I think are appropriate for y'all, but links that will give you even more background and history on the holidays, the festivals, fixed stars, etc., etc. We're all about information around here. I love the data. My moon is in Virgo. I can't get enough. What am I going to do? Okay, that's that stuff. Welcome to Tarot 6-week workshop coming up. Tarot Circle coming up exclusively for patrons. Wheel of the Year class, Beltane, coming up for everybody. Litha workshop at the music festival. Try to get tickets. That's it. Okay, let's actually get into everything else that we want to talk about, because that is more than enough of that. So, we are starting this week off Thursday, April 13th, 2013. This is Ostara season, waning moon in Capricorn, lunar week number 4 by some lunar calendars, by the calendar that we are following this week. And when we have a waning half moon, we have an opportunity to look back over our process that we are in, whether that's just this individual lunar cycle or a larger process or both. And be real with ourselves about what needs adjustment and or what needs to be left behind to create space for new opportunities in the future. And something I say about the waning square every time is I think a lot of us default to thinking about what didn't work in my process, my stuff, my whatever it is that I'm doing, what isn't working, and let me get that out of the way to clear space for something that might work. But I also always encourage, more so on some moons than others, but generally speaking, with the waning square, I almost always encourage also thinking about what did work that could work even better. The waning square sometimes is about saying, hey, we gave it a shot. It's time to let this thing go. But sometimes it's also about, hey, this was really successful. And am I holding on to it because I'm afraid of letting go of something successful in lieu of something that could be even more successful or, appropriate to what I'm trying to do? That thing. Okay. So that's the vibes of the waning square. And we get at least one of those a month. What am I saying when I'm saying waning square? The sun and moon are literally square to each other in the sky. They are at a 90-degree angle to each other. And we are saying that it is waning because the moon is getting smaller and smaller in the sky. We have had our full moon and we are headed towards a new moon, which means that the moon is visually getting smaller and smaller in the sky, waning. So, this moon in particular is waning half moon, 23 degrees of Capricorn, 2 a.m., 2:11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and it is square Jupiter at 22 degrees of Aries. It has a few other things that it is faceting, but or what am I trying to say? Transiting, interacting with, whatever. Just say talk. Um, thanks, Juju. Um, but that's the one that I think is the closest, and that's the one I'm focused on. So this moon is encouraging us to dive into the conflict that you might feel around making money and acquiring wealth as defined by our current society, right? So that has lots and lots of baggage with it, and the stuff that we have to do, the compromises we have to make to secure the bag, right, might be many, and they might be relatively uncomfortable for some of us. And so this is a moon for us to kind of ponder that stuff. It's a square, so we already know that there's going to be some friction, right? We already know that there's going to be some like, ooh, that part feels weird. Um, and so this moon is encouraging us to dive into that conflict, um, especially with the square from Jupiter, which is a planet that can represent our hungers and our capacity for more on the physical plane. And so Jupiter, in a square here with the sun, right? If it's squaring the moon, it's probably squaring the sun too. No, actually, it's conjunct. Lies. Lies of Manelli. Um, the sun, the Jupiter is conjunct the sun, and so it's kind of sitting on the side of the sun, or it's influencing the sun to want to say more. Give me more, 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 more. Um, and the moon might be the only oh no, the moon might be the only voice of reason, quote unquote. That's like, do I really need more? Is more really the answer to the problem, or is that really the solution to my situation? Is that correct for me? So that's kind of the conversation here. Now, some questions for you. Can this conflict be resolved in some way by charity? I would say kinda, but kind of not, because while charity does address the needs of our community members, charity also stresses the separation between the haves and the have nots. And that paradigm of who has and who doesn't have is fundamental to capitalism, right? It's fundamental to the economy and the wealth paradigm in our world. I was going to say in the West, but I think it's bigger than that. Um, and and so charity kind of relies on that sense of like somebody has stuff and somebody doesn't have stuff. Mutual aid, and I'm always banging this drum, here we go again, but mutual aid might actually be a more realistic remedy to this conflict because it moves us away from the idea that some of us have and some of us don't, and it moves us towards the idea that everyone has something to give and everyone also has some kind of a need or some kind of a lack. And that, I think, is really emphasized potentially by the square from Jupiter as well, because Jupiter really wants to focus on how much do I have and how much more can I get. And look at how abundant I am, look at how generous I am, and can utilize its feelings of abundance or generosity as a means of avoiding other work and like discomfort. Huh. So that's what's up with this moon. Now, in general, even with a square, moon and Jupiter emphasizes generosity, goodwill, benevolence, and a very optimistic viewpoint. So even if there is an element of friction here, it may also come with a feeling of like, we can work this out, we can talk this out, we can figure this out. Okay. For our lunar body work, for our waning half moon in Capricorn, we are resting, relaxing, nourishing, supporting, or otherwise restoring our bones, our hair, our nails, and our teeth, all parts of the body ruled by Capricorn, as I say every single week, and I'm saying it again. Not a doctor of the human corpus, a doctor of witchery. Thank you very much. Please check with your trusted health advisor if you're wanting to incorporate any of this information in your general health routine, and also uh, work with the metaphor. Always check out the metaphor. Um, for our plant body work, we are maintaining or breaking down old containers. Containers connected to the planet Saturn, which is the ruling planet of Capricorn. So we're breaking down or we are mending or fixing containers, borders, fences, planter beds, structures. Anything that is a structural element in our house plants, in our outdoor plants, whatever that situation is. Great time for harvesting seeds and roots for replanting, fertilizing, planting roots and tubers, cultivating, cutting trees specifically for lumber and firewood. And you're going to want to let them dry out for a while. Pruning trees, doing pest or disease control. Again, especially now with our temperatures changing quite a bit, going to see more and more of that on your house plants. Pay attention. Planting roots, trees, perennials, biennials, or doing any plowing, soil aeration, or harvesting below ground. Below ground crops to eat or dry or store. And we have the chart up on the Patreon notes. And the only other astrology that we have for this day, for Thursday, April 13th, is that the moon then enters Aquarius, and that's it. We have very little astrology this week. I'm going to go ahead and do it in the order of the days as I've been doing it for the last couple of weeks. I'm back to this format again, and I kind of like it again. So that brings us right on into our holy days for April 13th. And it starts with a whole bunch of water festivals that take place throughout this week in Southeast Asia. One of the ones I'm going to focus on is Songkran. This is the Thai New Year. And we also have a Bengali New Year this week as well. This festival kicks off on April 13th. It usually lasts 3 or 4 days. And we know how that works, right? It could be a little less and a little more depending on what's up. But the word Songkran comes from a phrase in the Sanskrit language that means the passage of the sun. And water plays a really major role in this festival. Symbolically, it washes away the previous year so people can get ready for the next one. And then there's also spring cleaning, and the spring cleaning vibe, like, goes throughout society. So folks are cleaning their homes, yes, but they do a spring cleaning on their office, their workstation, if they're in school, like their classrooms, their desk area, public spaces, get a good sweep down and tidying up. And remember, we just had the tomb sweeping festival from China a couple of weeks ago too. So there is very much this emphasis at this time of year of like, clean it out, reset it, do the thing. Yeah. So lots of really cool stuff going on for that holiday. Also on this day, and I didn't even say it, that was from our Southeast Asian friends and family, friends and ancestors. Whoops. I feel out of practice. Running from April 13th to 14th from our Sikh friends and ancestors, we have the festival of Basaiki. This is also known as Vasaiki. This is the largest festival of the Sikh community. This festival is celebrated with a whole lot of props and grandeur. On the day of, families and friends gather together and prepare special dishes and celebrate the start of the harvest season. What? Yes. And we know this is true also in other modern cultures and ancient cultures, especially Egyptian, um, where the spring kicks off the harvest festival because summer is too hot, and anything that anybody tries to grow during summer is just going to die. And so the growth cycle actually runs from fall through winter and into spring. Trippy, right? Um, but this is a day of sweet beginnings. Um, and people get together, they party, they have a good time. Hug your friends, forgive your enemies, and make new bondings. That's the general vibe of this particular holiday. From our Roman friends and ancestors, we have the Venalia Prima in honor of Venus Erycina. And the Venalia are a couple of different Roman festivals that happen throughout the year. They are centered on wine, wine making, and the wine harvest. So, in particular, grapes that would have been harvested to make wine. Um, and they were held in honor, or are held in honor of Jupiter and a particular version of Venus. So the Venalia Prima, which is this one, also known as the Venalia Urbana, held here in April to bless and sample last year's wine and ask for good weather until the next harvest. And then the next Venalia will happen in August before the harvest and grape pressing. Um, and yeah, partying, drinking wine, pretty straightforward, right? Okay. So who is uh this particular Venus? Well, scooch down here to her particular name, going to the Wikipedia page and checking out Venus. Venus Erycina, or the Erycine or Erycine Venus, was specifically a Punic statue of Astarte that was worshipped in Rome as a version of Venus. Um, and what's interesting to me is that she was sort of dedicated to and worshipped by quote unquote common girls, also prostitutes or sex workers. Um, and this Venalia was one of the few holidays or festivals where prostitutes and sex workers were allowed slash welcome to kind of come out into the streets and celebrate the same way that everybody else could. In Rome, sex workers were often slaves or had a very similar situation to slaves. And they were often not allowed to participate in festivals. They were not allowed to participate in holy stuff. Rome, as we have discussed many times, behind the times in a lot of things, culturally speaking. Um, so this was one of the few where she was actually, they were actually welcome to participate in what was going on. Um, I just think about things happening in the world, things happening about in the past. Yeah, I'm sure it's just a coincidence, right? Okay. Also on this day, from our Japanese friends and ancestors, we have Kamotama Yorihime, and this is a festival dedicated to Tama Yorihime, who is the mother of Jimu. She is a goddess in Japanese mythology, and she is the daughter of a sea dragon, the younger sister of Toyotama Hime. And she has a really cool myth, which we're not going to get into right now, but she goes on a variety of adventures and does a bunch of cool stuff. And interestingly enough, the word Tama-Yorihime is a generic term for shamanesses who dedicate their lives exclusively to their deities, aka priestesses. Um, there's a Japanese folklorist, Kunio Yanagita, who has the view that Tama-Yorihime means a consecrated woman to whom a spirit descends, and that the intimate relationships between the two helped generate belief in mother-son pair deities. Very interesting because boy howdy, do we see a lot of really powerful mother-son deity pairs at this time of year and, throughout the year. Um, in addition, since the line of succession is based on grain spirits, so here again, grain, harvest, that stuff, um, her sons are they have all of these grain oriented and harvest oriented names. Though it is thought that they were priestesses who possessed grain spirits, so even the names of her sons ultimately were the names of priestesses that might have been in service to her. Pretty cool stuff. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, that moves us on to Friday, April 14th. Everybody take a drink of water, get yourself centered. And this day features more or less our only astrology of this entire week, aside from whatever the moon is doing. And so, what do we have going on here? We have Venus in Gemini square Saturn in Pisces at 4 degrees. And we also have Saturn in Pisces sextiling the North Node and trining the South Node in Taurus at 4 degrees / Scorpio 4 degrees. So let's talk a little bit about this Venus square Saturn situation. Because mostly no one's looking forward to this. Mostly no one is excited about this. And what do we get with Venus and Saturn? Generally kind of bummer vibes. Let's just cut to the chase. It almost doesn't matter what the aspect is, if it's a trine or if it's a sextile, opposition, square, whatever. Venus not super stoked to hang out with Saturn. Venus wants velvet and extra foam and wants everybody to smell good and wants it to just be super cute and everybody's having a nice time and it's all lovely, right? No bad vibes. And Saturn is like, I like eat bad vibes for breakfast. That's my job. Saturn is like, I don't care how ugly it is. I don't care how bad it smells. I don't care how uncomfortable it is, as long as it's functional and it's safe. And that is all that Saturn is concerned with. So Venus hanging out with Saturn, it's not instantly a party, right? Okay. And then when they're square to each other, extra so. But we want to remember where these planets are. Saturn is in Pisces and Venus is in Gemini. And we are in the midst of a larger conversation, thanks to Saturn having just moved into Pisces, with this phrase or this idea of building the vessel that will hold the fantasy / creating the containers that kind of hold back the abyss. You're going to hear me say those phrases over and over and over again this year, as we get comfy with Saturn hanging out in Pisces. And so this is one of those moments where we have to kind of check the plan, we check the blueprint, we check the course, and we might get some difficult news or some adjustment that it feels uncomfortable. In this conversation around Saturn and Pisces, building the container that can hold the fantasy, part of what Saturn is going to tell us as we do that work is we can build the vessel that holds the fantasy, but we might have to compromise on this one part right here. And we might have to shave off that one part right there. And we might not be able to do that thing exactly the way that the dream has dictated it, but we could probably do something kind of like it, right? Saturn is going to show us where we have to compromise, where we're going to have to leave some things behind, where we're going to have to maybe constrict or shrink our idea of utopia a little bit, to be able to literally create a container that could actually hold it. That's basically Saturn's job, is I can help you get close to this fantasy idea that you have, but you're going to have to compromise with me on some stuff that's just too far-fetched. And so sometimes we're going to be in league with that conversation. We're going to go, oh yeah, you know what? That compromise makes sense. That thing that Saturn wants me to drop off. Yeah, I get it. That's a bummer, but I understand, right? We're with Saturn. We're in the conversation with Saturn. We're like, yes, I get you. But on a day like today with Venus and square, It's like, oh man, what a bummer. That was my favorite part, but that was the cutest part, but that was the tastiest part, but that was the part that felt the best. And I have to get rid of that. Oh man, it might feel like that. It might feel like a day where you understand the constriction, but you don't like it at all. And it brings some bummer vibes. Again, Saturn is so focused on security and tradition and just keeping things running smooth and safe, that it will totally forego feeling good about things and can get a little fixated on, like, oh no, it's all coming down. It's probably not all coming down. It's probably just getting a little bit of an edit that probably was necessary. Not news that we want to hear, but maybe news that we needed to hear. News because Venus is in Gemini. Okay, along with this, we want to remember that Saturn is also sextiling the North Node and trining the South Node. And so when we're dealing with the North Node and the South Node, their words like fate and destiny can start to kind of thread their way into our vocabulary, whether we work with those ideas or not. Things can feel very fated or destined for us. And I think I'm sure I've said this before in the podcast, and I know I've said it to folks who work with me, with when we're looking at your chart. But like, to me, it isn't even really about whether or not that thing is destined for you. It's more about, why do you think that? What's coming up for you when this thing comes into your purview and you're like, this is destined for me? Like, why? What's happening for you in that process? And even if it is destined for you, what does that mean? Right? But in the context of this conversation, I think that this lends Saturn a type of certainty in this conversation. And so Venus might be feeling really bullied in this conversation. And Saturn might be feeling like, look, bro, it's destiny. What are you going to do? Like, it's just got to be like this, man. And that may or may not be true. So that's all. Venus moves pretty quickly, so this transit isn't going to last more than about 36 hours, maybe 48 hours altogether. Be curious if it bums you out. Um, and also, something, looking at my notes, I have written down, don't ask unless you're ready to know, right? Venus, Gemini, Saturn, angry grandpa. Saturn might be like, hey, did you want some bad news? Well, here, and Venus is like, sure, wait, what? So don't ask if you're not ready to know. And that might literally just be the smartest way to move through some of this stuff, and to say to yourself, let me give it a couple of days, and then I will open this email that I'm pretty sure has bad news for me. It's not going to necessarily change the content of the email, right? Schrodinger's email, sure, maybe, but it might change your capacity to deal with it. Aha, right? Which makes all the difference a lot of the time, right? Okay. For our holy days for Friday, April 14th, we have, for our sidereal astrologers out there, sidereal, sidereal astrologers, the sun is entering Aries on this day. Tropical astrologers are like, what? Yes, I know. It's because everything is behind and forward at all times. Also on this day, from our Norse friends and ancestors, running from approximately April 14th to the 25th, we have Sommersblot. I have a huge piece up on my website. You could just go to the Ostara section and scroll down and you'll find a link to it. Sommersblot is a hearkening to a tradition that we see in ancient Western Europe amongst a lot of different cultures, the Celts, the Norse, Anglo-Saxons, perhaps even some of the Teutonic groups did this, where they basically just chopped the year in half. And there's the bright half of the year and the dark half of the year. And they kick off approximately somewhere between spring equinox and Beltane and somewhere between fall equinox and Samhain or Mabon. Or no, excuse me, fall equinox, aka Mabon, and Samhain. And that's it. bright half of the year, darker half of the year. So Sommer's Blot means summer's blood or summer's finding. And this would have been a sacrifice, but also a major feast kicking off the bright half of the year. More information on my website. Also on this day, from our Chinese and Korean and Japanese friends and ancestors, we have Chengxi Festival. This is the double third festival. This is a key holiday originating in this part of the world and is celebrated in many, many countries. And it's called the double third festival because it is the third day of the third lunar month. um, and I found multiple listings for this year, so I may have gotten my dates wrong. It could be uh next week. So there is that too. So we might be talking about this a little bit early. But this is ultimately a ceremony for getting rid of evil by bathing in a river. People will hold a sacrificing ceremony on a riverside to honor ancestors and then take a bath in the river with herbs to cleanse their bodies. And then folks would go on a spring outing, etc., etc. And so here again, we have another water situation happening here. And I think that's interesting because for us in the West, we're in the season of Aries, right? We're in the fieriness of Aries. But as we know, throughout spring, we've got snow melt, we've got rains coming through. The weather is very volatile at this time of year. And so I think that there might be something there around worshiping these entities or these elemental forces with also a sense of like appeasement. And also we do have a lot of New Year's celebrations kicking off at spring equinox and sort of running through this time of year. And so there is that sense of like, let me wash off the old thing before we step into the new thing. And tangent, you knew there was one coming sooner or later. This is something that I talk about in the various classes throughout the year, which is we don't have to do it all on day one of our Sabbath, right? We have the day or days of the Sabbath, but then we have another 6 to 8 weeks before we hit the next Sabbath. And this is a perfect example of why I say you don't have to jam it all in on the Sabbath. You've got 6 to 8 weeks to honor this energy, make your shift, change shape, do your rituals, honor your people, your gods, goddesses, ancestors, guides, guardians, etc. Is because we see that around the planet. We see the shift into a new season, right? And we are not doing those types of festivals anymore. We're doing these types of festivals. But then that idea runs week after week after week. And I just think that it's very important to recognize that that is a very real way of kind of living within our spiritual reality. Is like it's happening all the time. There's always another day that we could do the thing. If today doesn't work, if I'm not feeling it, what about tomorrow? What about next week? Maybe that will be more in line with where I am right now. Okay, back to the stuff. From our Orthodox friends and ancestors, Orthodox Catholic friends and ancestors, we have Good Friday. And we've talked about Good Friday in the last couple of weeks with regular old Good Friday. This is the Friday that Christ from Christianity is crucified. Not entirely certain why they name it Good Friday, but there it is. He's crucified and dies and is going to chill for a few days and then be resurrected. Hey, kind of a theme at this time of year. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. And from our Islamic friends and ancestors, we have Jumu'atal Wida, and this is the last Friday in the month of Ramadan before Eid. This word means gathering, approximately, but also farewell. Juma comes from the Jumu'ah, excuse me, comes from the Arabic word gathering. Wida means farewell, and this is one of the holiest days in the year, probably the second holiest day of the month of Ramadan, and um, folks who are pious do fancy stuff, lots of praying, lots of reading. But generally speaking, it's sort of a time of celebration as the end of Ramadan month approaches. And it's very interesting this year how many of our Orthodox, or what do I want to say, organized religion, springtime holidays have all fallen on the same days this year. Why? How did that happen? It's because our new moon was directly after spring equinox. And so it lined up our lunar calendar with our solar calendar. It's not going to stay that way for the rest of the year, but it kicked us off for springtime this year with that alignment. Kind of cool stuff. Okay, that is everything for Friday, April 14th. Let's now move on to Saturday, April 15th. For astrology, the moon enters Pisces. That's it. That's all that happens. And we're going to talk about moon and Pisces with the Sunday information. And that's literally all I have to say about the astrology of Saturday, April 15th. Okay, exciting. So, moving on to our holy days. From our Celtic slash pagan friends and ancestors, running from April 15th to May 12th, we have the Celtic tree month of Willow. And Willow is tied deeply to this time of year, which marks growth and emergence. What has been latent and gathered in the depths of winter now begins to really leap forth. For this reason, Willow is deeply associated with Brigid, the maiden goddess element of the triple goddess, Maid Mother Crone, in some systems. But Willow is used for, or is worked with, I should say, for guarding people on their underworld journeys, which we have a lot of ancestor stuff happening, and lending poetic sensibility. There's Virgo in Gemini, Venus in Gemini. And also it gives some powers of divination, intuition, insight, those types of things. The willow tree gives Orpheus the ability to speak to everything around him, which might have been part of why he lost his mind. But one of the things I think is really interesting about this is in the Ogham alphabet, Willow is Sally, which later became the name Sally, which means to express intense emotions or to rush out or sally forth, right? To leap in Latin is salire, which is also tied to the name Willow. So there's something about this about emotions and expressing our emotions and being forthright with our emotions. And interestingly enough, Willow lives right next to water, in it or very, very near it. So here again, we have an entity that is here to help us around water, something about water. Getting in touch with and expressing our deep emotions, expressing exuberant growth at this time, all of that good stuff. And from willow and willow bark, we get salicin, which is converted into salicylic acid, aka aspirin. So willow is also a painkiller for us, and a pain and a helper in that regard. And a lot of folks that I've been working with currently have been are having a Chiron return, or they're having a pretty intense Chiron transit right now. So maybe bring in some willow plant energy, go hang out at, by the river's edge or the local cemetery and ask if some willow would like to come and work with you. And if you get a yes, bring some home, put it on the altar. Um, might be really helping with some of that pain that we're feeling. So that's what's up for the next month with our Celtic tree work. Also on this day, from approximately April 15th to April 17th, from our pagan friends and ancestors, we have the Feast of the Seas. So again, water, right? Pagan friends and ancestors, this is a date that comes from the modern Wheel of the Year calendars that have been produced over the last 15 to 20 years on the internet. And we've talked about this before. I find that most of the days are just approximations to something else that we have now learned how to date more accurately from in the month from year to year. But this is kind of a placeholder for that stuff. So in my notes, we have god and goddess like Olokun and Yemaya from Yoruba Santeria friends and ancestors, and Okinos and Tethys, which would have been Old Greek friends and ancestors. Also on this day, we have New Year's from our Bengali friends and ancestors, pretty straightforward. From our Roman friends and ancestors, we have the feasts of Robigalia and Serapia. And Robigalia was a festival in ancient Rome named for the god Robigus. Its main ritual was a sacrifice to protect grain fields from disease. Games in the form of major and minor races were held. This was one of the several agricultural festivals in April to celebrate and vitalize the growing season. But the darker sacrificial elements of these occasions are also fraught with anxiety about crop failure and the dependence on the divine to avert it. Getting a lot of that throughout this week, aren't we? Right? Like we're trying to make something happen, but we've got to follow the rules of these forces that seem like way more powerful than us and may or may not actually have our best interests in mind. The Robigalia was held at the boundary of the Ager Romanus, which was a grove, but uh, there's connections here to Hecate and other chthonic deities, even though this was kind of this public thing and it was about grain crops and such. But if you remember talking with me last year, and we'll talk about it again this year when we get there, when we move through Lunasa season and into Mabon season, the high part of the growth cycle into the harvest cycle, there is the like continuous offerings to the chthonic deities slash the ancestors that live underground, almost as if we're asking them push the plants up, push from underneath, push the plants up. So there is potentially a connection to that stuff here with this holiday. Also on this day, as I mentioned, Serapia. The Serapia was a Roman imperial religious festival devoted to the Greco-Egyptian god Serapis. And Serapis was incorporated into the imperial cult of Rome because of his importance as a city god. Um, and he was sort of like seen in conjunction with Sol or the sun, Jupiter, and Neptune. Here again with the water vibes. Now, obviously, that water thing um, connects us to watering the plants that we've just thrown into the ground, right? But we are headed into Taurus season and then Gemini season, where we are going to start to see the waterways of the world begin to open up. And there would have been many blessings and appeasements to water deities and the bodies of water themselves, rivers in particular, and oceans and seas in particular, because these were the avenues of travel and trade. And so people are doing whatever they can to placate the deities and make it possible for their business to take place, basically. Okay. Also on this day, from our pagan friends and ancestors, we have the Feast of Tellus Mater. Tellus Mater is literally Terra. or Terra Mater or Terra Mater. This is Mother Earth, literally a personification of the earth itself. And again, here at the beginning of the growth cycle, please, Mom, help my plants grow. Thanks so much. Here's a sacrifice. Regularly associated with Ceres, um, regularly associated with Gaia, with Cell, regularly witnessed with a cornucopia or bunches of flowers, etc., etc. All of that good stuff. Again, this is one of the dates from our pagan friends and ancestors. Also, from our pagan friends and ancestors, we have the Feast of Bast at this time. Bastet, the ancient Egyptian goddess. In Greece, she was Ailuros. Bastet was worshipped in Bubastis, originally as a lioness and then a cat-headed deity. And she is pretty dope. She kind of does it all. She was originally a very fierce lioness warrior goddess, very much like Sekhmet. But later she became the cat goddess that we are familiar with today. She's depicted as the daughter of Ra and Isis, the consort of Ptah, and a protector of Lower Egypt. And she oversaw pregnancy and childbirth, possibly because of the fertility of the domestic cat, which I think is very cool. She's also a goddess of protection against contagious diseases and evil spirits. So keep wearing your masks, people. Bastet requires it. Okay, that is everything for Saturday, April 15th. Moving on to Sunday, April 16th, we have our balsamic moon in Pisces, 11 degrees at 11:07 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And while this moon is aspecting a bunch of stuff, the one thing that I'm focusing on is that it is trine Mars at 11 degrees of Cancer. So first off, what are we doing with our balsamic moon? The fruit is distilled. And I love that this moon is called the balsamic moon because it really makes me think about the distillation process of vinegar and how many things, how many steps have to take place before we can get to vinegar. And like, oh, vinegar is bitter. Vinegar is so helpful. Vinegar cleans things. Vinegar helps with our digestion. Um, and vinegar makes certain types of baking possible, right? Like vinegar does a lot of really cool stuff for us. And yet we have to do a lot of stuff before we can get to vinegar. We've got to plant a seed, we've got to grow a plant, we have to trim that prune the plant, right, to encourage the right kind of growth. We have to witness a fruit be born. We have to wait till that fruit ripens. Then we have to wait until that fruit over ripens, and then we have to begin to process that fruit in one way or another, and ultimately put it through a really intense process so that it eventually becomes vinegar, right? There's a lot of stuff. So think about that as the name of the last portion of our lunar cycle. It's really a reminder of like, hey, this is the time to take a concentrated sample of everything that we've done in this last lunar process. We get one a month. Pretty cool. And interestingly enough, the balsamic moon pulls on us from the future. It is a very future oriented portion of the lunar cycle. It's already thinking about the next thing. It's like, I'm done with this one. I already want to go on to the next one. The lunar cycle is nearly complete, and we are already getting messages around the work from the next cycle. So this balsamic moon in Pisces is a deeply spiritual moon. And it is an interesting energy in the face of the previous lunar phase, as well as other astrology this week, that encourages us to take a long look at the conflict between materialism and emotional or spiritual wealth. The trine from Mars can encourage us to adopt a charity starts at home type of mentality. But what does that translate into in the realm of gods and goddesses? Just hang out with that thought for a little while. Um, and in general, if you are not a generally spiritual person, don't worry about this. You could just let this moon slide by or do whatever makes sense, read some philosophical works or something along those lines. But there really isn't anything like spirituality. And I'm not saying that in the sense of like you need to be spiritual. If you are, you are. If you're not, you're not. But there isn't there isn't a replacement for spirituality. You can't go study some other thing and have the same experience as you do with communing with a deity. It's just different. And so this is a moon to do that. Just hang out with your deities, if nothing else. You don't even have to think on all of this conflict stuff if you don't want to. But I do encourage you to kind of think about material wealth versus spiritual wealth. And we're going to come back to that with our journal entries at the end of the podcast. So for our lunar body work, we are resting, relaxing, nourishing, supporting, or otherwise restoring the legs, especially the ankles and the feet. These are the parts of the body ruled by Pisces. And for our plant body work, we are planting roots, except potatoes. We are watering and irrigating, grafting, layering, taking cuttings. Great time for that. Fertilizing, cultivating, cutting trees for lumber and firewood. We are pruning trees or pruning our plants. We're doing pest and disease control. We're planting roots, which I said already, sorry. We're planting trees, perennials, biennials, plowing, or doing any kind of harvesting for below ground crops to eat or dry or store. And again, we have no astrology of note for this day. So moving directly on to the holy days of, oh, what have I done? Here we go. Sorry. Too many windows open. Moving on to the holy days of Sunday, April 16th. So we have our heliacal rising of Alfurg, the fixed star Alfurg. Alfurg is found where? The very northern end of the tail, the very end of the tail of the northern fish in Pisces. And the ancient Babylonian name for this star was or is Kulat Nunu, with Nunu meaning fish, and Kulat referring to either a bucket or the cord that ties the fish together. The traditional name Al-Furg is from the Arabic al-Farj, which means an outpouring of water. And we talk about this stuff quite a bit in the Ostara class. I have a whole page in the back about the cord that ties these two fish together and what is this outpouring of water and how does that connect to Aquarius and all of that good stuff. I'm not going to go over it again, people. You can go get the book if you want it. But let's say this, a double star in the cord near the tail of the northern fish associated with the Greek head of Typhon. And Typhon, of course, being the serpent goddess who held creation in her coils before Marduk chopped her up into a bunch of pieces, and we ended up with all of this. Thanks, Marduk, as we often like to say. Again, and I will probably repeat myself yet again, I have beef with Marduk. He owes me $5. Okay. What else is happening on this day? Running approximately from April 16th to the 25th, we have the Lyrids meteor showers. The Lyrids come from a space in the sky near the star Vega and the constellation Lyra. You can look this up. I have the link for patrons, but I'll just say check it out on Earth Sky. It's a great website for depicting when and where and how to watch this particular meteor shower. The high points are probably going to be between April 21st and April 23rd. And this meteor shower is always anticipated because it sort of breaks the fast. We don't really have any meteor showers from January till now. And so kind of interesting stuff. There's a lot of cool myth and folklore connected to this particular meteor shower as well. Okay. Also on this day, from our Orthodox Catholic friends and ancestors, we have Orthodox Easter. Jesus is risen. along with the rising sun in the bright half of the year. Coincidence? Moving on. Also on this day from our Celtic friends and ancestors, we have Saint Padarn's Day. Padarn isn't like the coolest guy in the world. He was a early 6th century British Christian abbot bishop who founded St. Padarn's Church in Wales. He appears to be one and the same with the first bishop of Braga, and Saint Paternus. And I'm always paying attention to anytime we have a Padarn or a Paternus or whatever, because it means father, it means patriarchy, but it also means Petra, which means rock. And we know that we have a massive festival at this time of year dedicated to a rock goddess, the Megalesia, dedicated to the goddess Kybele, the world builder. What do we like to say? I'm sure it's just a coincidence. And now a brief word from our sponsor. That's me. If you love this podcast, you can support this work through Patreon. Thank you to all my patrons who help me pay rent every month. You can leave a review on your podcast service, wherever it is that you listen to this. And if you are feeling especially hedonistic, you can give it a rating. 5 stars is actually the most occult rating that you could possibly give. Also, I have mentioned this for the last several weeks, but I swear to God, this is really happening. I will be announcing some workshops and some standalone classes in the new year, both on tarot as well as paganism and witchcraft. These classes will be limited entry. My patrons will have first access to sign up, and then folks following the newsletter, and then I will announce them publicly on social media and my website. I will be rerunning the 6-week Welcome to Tarot workshop. It was super fun. I'm very excited to teach it again. It is a dope workshop, if I do say so myself. And then I will be following up that workshop with 4 standalone single-day workshops. I'm expecting them to be 2 hours apiece, probably maybe closer to 3 hours apiece. And we will be talking about material that certainly is going to build off of what is in the workshop, but you won't have to take the workshop to be able to understand what's going on in the 4 standalone classes. And then I will also be offering some more in-depth stuff than what I already have offered in terms of witchcraft and paganism, but I don't want to say any more now. All right, that's the end of the ad. Leave a rating, goddammit. Thanks. All righty, and that brings us to Monday, April 17th, and the only astrology that we have for this day is that the moon enters Aries. See what I mean? Like, we literally have almost no astro transits happening this week at all, which is also part of why that Venus square Saturn situation might hit real hard, is because there's no cushioning. There isn't a whole bunch of other stuff going on. It's just like empty stage. Everybody's totally naked, and here comes Saturn having an argument with Venus. Okay. I don't know why everybody's naked in that. Oh, Lord, help me. Because it's spring, that's why. Sure. Look, lie with me, okay? Okay. So that brings us directly into our holy days for Monday, April 17th. And that is kicking off with the heliacal rising of the fixed star Vertex. And we find this star in the Andromeda Galaxy. Pretty fucking fancy. If only the Andromeda Galaxy was brighter, it would be absolutely huge in our sky. It's a big old galaxy, but it's very, very dim, and so we cannot see it as well as we potentially could. It's the nearest major galaxy to us and our galaxy, the Milky Way, and just so you know, is approaching us at 100 kilometers per second. It is expected to collide with our galaxy in about 4 billion years. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. It'll be exciting. That's really all I've got to say about this. Ptolemy believed that this had some connection with Virgo, but Who knows, honestly? What does that guy know about anything? That's about all I have to say about this star. That's it. Just Andromeda. All right, cool. Vertex. Everybody loves it. All right, moving on to April 17th and 18th from our Jewish friends and ancestors. We have Yom HaShoah. This is Holocaust Remembrance Day. And we here on the podcast believe that the Holocaust actually occurred. And this is a day to light a candle to think about those folks who were oppressed. It marks the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising as well. And I just want to say this because you know me, I'm full of good news. When U.S. troops showed up to these camps, they would release people if they were straight. They would release people if they were cisgendered. Folks who were gay, folks who were lesbian, bisexual, or transgendered, well, those were a crime, and they were kept in those internment camps. And so, the U.S. has a long, long history of persecuting LGBTQIA plus folks, two-spirit people, and it's not new. So to me, this day has a double whammy feeling to it. But for those who were freed, they should have never been imprisoned in the first place. And the Holocaust, again, was real. It really happened, and it was really fucking awful. And never again. Never again. From our Canadian Catholic friends, we have the Feast of St. Katari. I talk about this every year. I bring this holiday up every year. It's not my favorite. This is another day of oppression. Katari Tekak Wita, Gadere Degawita, was a Mohawk woman who was brought into, quote unquote, Catholicism at a very young age. And she converted at age 19. She was baptized and given the Christian name Kateri in honor of Catherine of Siena. And she died at the age of 24. So a very, very short life, and was canonized. And in my opinion, and so I realize this is my opinion, and I've got a couple of biases. I don't know if you've picked up on that. I think that this was yet another means of manipulating the image of Catholics in Canada. And I think that this was intended to be another form of oppression, suppression, assimilation of the native people of Turtle Island and Canada, what we now call Canada, into these organized religions and away from their natural ways of life and their own belief systems. So I think I think of her as a hostage. I realize that that's probably kind of offensive to some people. I'm not sorry. Sorry, not sorry. My guess as a white lady in 2023, my guess is that if she had had other options, she might have taken them. I think that's all I'm going to say about her. I hope she's resting in peace wherever she is. From our Egyptian friends and ancestors, we have the holiday of Sham el Nassim. Sham el Nassim is an Egyptian public holiday that marks the beginning of spring. It always coincides with Easter Monday in the Julian calendar, following the custom of the Coptic Orthodox Church, aka our Orthodox Catholics. The holiday is believed to have originated in ancient Egypt as early as potentially 4,500 years ago or more. Back in the day, most cultures celebrated the beginning of spring sometime around the vernal equinox, and Egypt was not an exception. The date of the spring equinox was calculated by observing the direction of the sunlight at dawn over the pyramids. Colored eggs. Decorated eggs. Hey, hey, hey. Yes, we've been doing this for a very long time. We talk about it in the Ostara class quite a bit. Um, there's fish dried in the sun. Hey, what's the ending of winter? Oh, Pisces? Weird, huh? That's wild. Um, people write their wishes on eggs and then hang them in baskets from houses and trees, uh, etc., etc., etc. Pretty cool. It's a day of like hanging out outside and enjoying the weather and just generally being stoked that the beautiful time of year is here. And from our uh, Islamic friends and ancestors, we have Lelat Al Qadir, which is known as the Night of Power or the Night of Destiny. It is believed that this is the night when the Quran was first sent down from heaven to the world, and also the night when the first verses of the Quran were revealed to Muhammad. It is described to be better than 1,000 months of worshiping. The exact date, according to Muslim sources, its exact date is uncertain, but it was one of the odd numbered nights in the last 10 days of Ramadan. And so different factions of Islam, different groups within Islam will celebrate this on different days. Some people are going to celebrate it on today. Some people are going to celebrate it a couple of days from now, the 27th or the 29th or the 25th or the 21st or the 19th, etc., as long as it's an odd numbered day. And don't get it twisted. The weird, funny part about this is I moved this date because technically it will be taking place on April 18th here in America because it will be the 19th there. So I scooched it back to the 17th just to give it you know what I'm trying to say. Look it up. Look it up. Okay. And last but not least, Tuesday, April the 18th, we have no astrology of note. And our only holy day that I have in my calendar is from our Roman friends and ancestors, the Ludi Flore. And Floralia is a holiday that we talked about last week or the week before. I guess I didn't actually put out a podcast last week, but I put up notes for patrons. So in my mind, it happened. It's like a lot of things. In my mind, it's true. That explains so much. The Floralia was a festival in ancient Rome to honor the goddess Flora. Woohoo! Because, of course, flowers popping off or bussin', as the kids say. I don't even know if I'm allowed to use that word or should use that word. uh, but going wild, going ham out there in the natures. Um, the festival included the Ludi Flore, the Games of Flora, which lasted 6 days approximately. The festival had a licentious, pleasure seeking atmosphere, in contrast to many festivals which had a patrician character. The Games of Flora were plebeian in nature. And this is another one of the festivals where sex workers were more than welcome to come and do their thing and hang out and participate, dance naked, fight in mock gladiator battles, dance, have fun, and just generally celebrate. Which in the Wikipedia entry, what it says is their inclusion at religious festivals indicates that sex workers were not completely outcast from society, and that's an interesting thing to include, an interesting thing to consider. Um, because there is kind of the implication that they were otherwise outcast from society. But, how could that be if they're sex workers? They're not doing it by themselves. So, huh. But yes, that the events here would have been focused on fertility and very salacious and really fun and you know randy and ridiculous. Anytime we have a ludi, that is our Roman word, aka Latin word for games. And it's very normal for ludi to go along with a festival, especially when that festival lasts multiple days. And the ludi, the games, take all sorts of forms. They might be chariot races, they might be gambling, it might be just that there's like farmers markets, there might be plays and other performances. The ludi can take a variety of forms, but it's basically like party events that the city puts on for people while they're in town play, enjoying the festival, like celebrating the festival. And that's an interesting thing too. Just in that's a cool idea. Some of the stuff the Romans did were kind of cool, but let's not get crazy about it. Okay, so that is our week. That's our week. Um, and so now let's bump into what are we doing for tarot and witchcraft and journaling prompts for this week. For tarot, I am recommending hanging out with the Tower. What? Here's why. Just because I want to be an asshole. No, that's not the only reason. Why? Because the Tower represents a moment in our process where we are receiving some shocking information from outside, but the point of the information is to underline or point out or emphasize some piece of our plan, some piece of our puzzle that we are working on that does not fit, that's broken, that's fundamentally flawed in some way, that's not going to fit. And the information that we receive when we're hanging out in a tower moment can feel shocking, destabilizing, like, where did that come from? Oh my gosh. And sometimes that information is shocking or destabilizing because somebody lied to us and we really thought we understood what was going on and we didn't. Sometimes it's shocking or destabilizing um, because we were not in proximity to the information and we could have never known. And we're like, oh no, I didn't know. There was no way for me to know. Oh no, and now this piece is missing. But sometimes the shocking revelation that we are experiencing in the Tower card comes from us purposefully ignoring difficult information that the universe is trying to give us. And we're like, fingers in the ears, la 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 la, I can't hear you. So it doesn't exist. And yet there's a part of us that's like, I know that thing is going down. And so then the Tower moment happens and it's like, oh no, how could this happen to me? Why am I always a victim? And in this moment, why you are a victim might be because you've been purposefully ignoring some information. Now, I am not saying that that is what you are doing, but why I am saying that this is a card for us to work with is because of that Venus square to Saturn. Saturn and Venus square might be trying to bring us information that is a bummer and we don't want to hear it, but we need to hear it and integrate it in whatever way we're going to integrate it into our overall plan. It might feel like it's harsh vibes. It might feel like it's a setback. It might feel like it's a bummer jam. It might feel like it's a big no or an I don't think so or a whatever. But there's probably something in there that's really helpful to us if we can accept it. And that's why I think hanging out with the Tower this week is going to be helpful to us. The Tower is connected to the planet Mars, and we know that Mars is interacting with our moon this week as well. So understanding that the Tower card feels like an attack, even in the best of circumstances, but it really is usually the universe or the higher portions of ourselves or whatever you want to say there, trying to say, hey, get this, dude. I understand that this is not the best news in the world, but you have got to integrate this piece of information into your overall plan or else. Side note, another name for the Tower is the House of God. And our second moon this week is very, very spiritual. Back into that in just a second. So our witchcraft for this week could be none, but I think that continuing with initiations, continuing to honor our shape-shifting rites of passage, things of those types, and then spring cleaning and spring organizing still continues to make sense this week. So, our journaling prompts based on our astrology, based on our moons and stuff, are these. What is a spiritual life? What is wealth? How does the word values apply to both ideas? What is it to be rich in spirit? And what values could you try to manifest this year? Okay, going back over our astrology very quickly this week, we have none. Friday the 14th, we have Venus in Gemini square Saturn in Pisces at 4 degrees, and we have Saturn in Pisces sextile the North Node in Taurus and trine the South Node in Scorpio at 4 degrees. And that, my friends, is literally all of our astrology for this week. Now, before I let you go, I want to prepare you for what is coming next week. Wednesday the 19th, we have our second new moon in Aries, which is unusual. That is unusual for us to have two new moons in any sign. Very cool / pretty damn wild to have two new moons uh, at the beginning of a season. And the season that is all about beginnings. So very auspicious in a way to have these two new moons in Aries here at this time of year. Lovely. Our second new moon, however, is also going to be an eclipse. And eclipses are not exactly the best time for doing magic. So listen to your intuition. We're going to talk about it again next week. Obviously, I don't want to give away the whole thing. You got to have a reason to come back is what I was about to say. Good Lord. I am a freak sometimes. But this second new moon in Aries is giving us another opportunity to start things. But with a solar eclipse, I think that this is also going to be another opportunity to witness what isn't working, witness what might be in our way, witness what's lacking in our plan, that type of stuff. So doing no magic on that day is totally appropriate. Lots of people clear out when it's a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse. They're like, no, thank you. I will do magic the next day. Or the day after that, whatever. So listen to your intuition. First and foremost, if it feels funky, just hang out. Watch an old movie or something. If it does feel right to do magic, consider beginning magic, right? Consider magic about beginnings or initiations. And in particular, consider magic centered around clearing things out that might interrupt or poison the beginning of a thing or hinder the beginning of a thing, right? How much can we remove of that stuff? How much can we get out from that stuff? Also, next week, we will have the sun moving into Taurus. And also next week, we are going to have Mercury stationing retrograde in Taurus. It is one after another, wham, bam, bam. See, no astrology this week. We're saving it all up for next week. So, solar eclipse / second new moon in Aries, followed by the sun moving into Taurus, followed by the Mercury stationing retrograde in Taurus. That's not the only stuff that's happening. We have other big things, but that's enough. that's enough. So just be prepared. And note, as we roll through this week and we get closer and closer to the new moon, do you feel it? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. And if you do feel something, journal that. Write down what is coming up for you. Our moon will be traveling through Pisces before we get to Aries, so it may be difficult to find the words. You might find that it's easier to do like free writing, where you just let your hand go and you don't censor anything. You just let the words pour out and write them as they come. You might also find that artistic expression is easier than trying to find words to express what you're feeling or what you're experiencing. So it might be a really great time for making some art, for writing some poetry, that stuff. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, hang out with some Willow. You might just go to where there is Willow and hang out with Willow. You might also ask Willow if it would like to work with you. And if so, bring a leaf or two home and place it on your altar or your work table or what have you, as a painkiller and an assistant in finding the words and moving through whatever underworld journey we might have with our uh, lunar, or excuse me, solar eclipse new moon. All right, my friends, that's it, and that's all. We will meet here again in approximately 6 days, 5 days, I don't know, some point in the future, not too far from now. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other, okay? Or else I'm gonna come for you and I'm gonna put you over my knee. JK, I can't. That's my shoulder would never put up with that. All right. All right, my loves. Blessed be.